No one in Hollywood has a career like Nicolas Cage, and no one ever will. His filmography is like a casino run by David Lynch. Surreal, chaotic, occasionally brilliant, and you never quite know if you're winning or dreaming. Nicolas played action heroes, broken men, lunatics, sometimes all that in the same film. How did such a bizarre actor manage to become an action icon of the 90s? What legendary roles did he miss? How did that lead to a decade of B-movie oblivion? And how did he go through all that and still come out looking like a genius? Stick around to find out. Let's go. Two of Nicolas's very first projects were a canceled ABC show The Best of Times and a small part in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Back then, the actor still went by his real name, Nicolas Kim Coppola. These days, pretty much everyone knows that Nicolas is the talented nephew of his talented uncle, Francis Ford Coppola. And absolutely no one cares. At the time, though, young Nicolas decided it was best to kill the whole nephew vibe for the audience and picked a brand new last name. The inspiration was a combo: avant-garde composer John Cage and comic book hero Luke Cage. A weird mix for sure, but get used to it, we're talking about Nicolas Cage here. The name change was strictly for the public, of course. All the important people in Hollywood knew exactly who he was. Cage's debut roles went mostly unnoticed until Uncle Francis Ford stepped in with Rumblefish in 1983. Legend has it the casting process was brutal, but somehow the nephew outshined the crowd and impressed the uncle more than anyone else.
Of course!
The film flopped at the box office, but became one of Francis Ford Coppola's personal favorites, and later turned into a cult classic among fans. Thanks to Rumblefish, Cage landed a role in Valley Girl, a tiny movie based on a Shakespeare classic, with a budget of just $350,000. Cage got $5,000 out of that, meaning he basically worked for peanuts. So even then it became clear. Not only the actor didn't care much about the paycheck, but was ready to sleep in his car for 2 months straight. Cage did that to connect with his character more. According to him, that didn't help much. He considers his performance to be kind of weak there, and the only thing Nicolas figured out was that sleeping in a car sucks. Some scenes from Valley Girl were filmed in a strip club that would later become Johnny Depp's, the same one where River Phoenix would die of an overdose. At the time of the shoot, Depp had no clubs yet. Johnny was just living in Cage's apartment and hadn't even made it to the screen. Valley Girl turned out to be a box office hit, pulling in $17 million, costing $350,000. Securing an even brighter future for himself, Cage started experimenting with his voice around that time. He was convinced that every great actor had their own unique speaking style, and in the films that followed, Nicolas kept working on his signature manner. Most likely, the audiences didn't quite get the vibe at first.
Oh, I'm a cat. I'm a sexy cat.
Cage's next 4 films flopped at the box office, including Alan Parker's Birdie, which later became a cult classic. For Birdie, Cage didn't just sleep in a car. Hell no, he went further. He lost 15 kilos, had 2 teeth pulled without anesthesia, and slept on the ground wrapped in bandages, which he didn't take off even off set for over a month. Whether that actually helped the film become a cult classic later on, well, that's a $1 million question. Observing this situation, Uncle Francis Ford decided to help a bit and brought his nephew into the Cotton Club. That help didn't quite work out. The film had a budget close to $60 million and didn't even make 30, becoming one of the biggest flops of the year. But the next movie from Francis Ford, where he once again brought his nephew along, actually did give the actor's career a serious boost. Peggy Sue Got Married came out in 1986 and got nominated for both an Oscar and a Golden Globe. Financially, the film was successful as well. Costing $18 million, it made $41 in the US only. And the most important part was that Cher saw it. You might think like, fine, she saw it, end of story. But it wasn't that simple. The very next year, it was actually her who pushed Cage in Moonstruck. Cher played the main role there and was already a box office star. When producers tried to kick Cage out of the audition, Cher threatened to quit the movie unless that guy from Peggy Sue was cast alongside her. So the producers suddenly decided that maybe Nicolas wasn't such a bad actor after all. Funny enough, Moonstruck would later be seen by another big star, who would pull Cage into a career-defining role 10 years later. Moonstruck made over $120 million on a budget of $15 million, and became the movie that locked Cage's face into people's memory, even earning him his first Golden Globe nomination. At the same time, the Coen brothers released Raising Arizona, which not only made them famous, it also gave Nicolas another major role. You'd think things were finally looking up, but nope. What followed was a long, painful streak of commercial flops that lasted until 1995 and almost buried Cage's career for good. For nearly 8 years, the actor threw himself at indie projects left and right, clearly trying to show critics how talented he was. The first of those films was the now mimetic Vampire's Kiss in 1988. Or rather, Nicholas became the meme thanks to that one. These days, people like to say this movie was just ahead of its time, kind of like American Psycho, where taking it seriously isn't just unnecessary, but ridiculous. Cage himself stands by this statement, saying, "Vampire's Kiss is a brilliant film that people just didn't understand." He's also said he used the movie to experiment with non-traditional ways of acting. Many of those bizarre techniques would later sneak into some of his most iconic roles. The cockroach eating, thankfully, did not. Wild at Heart, where Nicholas's buddy Crispin Glover ran around with more cockroaches in his pants, flopped at the box office too.
Hey, McFly!
It wasn't all that bad, though. Wild at Heart was directed by the great and mighty David Lynch, so naturally it got a basket of awards and won at Cannes Film Festival. But Firebirds, Time to Kill, Zandali, Amos and Andrew, they all flopped without adding much to Cage's career. Even Deadfall couldn't be saved, despite a double dose of Coppola DNA. Honeymoon in Vegas and Red Rock West got a warm welcome from critics, and Red Rock West even managed to score the highest critical rating of Cage's entire career and is now considered a hidden neo-noir gem. In 1994, Nicholas turned down the lead in Speed to star in Guarding Tess. That opened the door for Keanu Reeves, whose career basically rocketed after that. Meanwhile, Guarding Tess flopped, just like Cage's next movie that year. The last two films in this flop streak were Kiss of Death and Trapped in Paradise. The director of the latter, George Gallo, had a contract with the studio for a couple of films, but the first one tanked. So when it came time to shoot Trapped in Paradise, the studio decided Gallo needed to be micromanaged and told exactly what to do. The director found a clever way out, though. He told everyone to piss off and drank himself into a tree state in his trailer. According to the cast, that's when Cage basically took over directing and finished the movie instead of Gallo. The result was a Frankenstein mess that pulled in just $6 million costing $20, and critics tore it to shreds. Cage was shaken by the flop of his actor-director experiment and started looking for a new kind of role, something bleak and miserable. Ideally, a character who drinks himself into a stupor and curses his own existence, something Nicholas could really relate to at that point. And that's when Leaving Las Vegas came along. The darkness level was set to max from the very start. Just days before production of the movie began, the author of the novel decided to leave the server. That nearly got Leaving Las Vegas canceled, but director Mike Figgis convinced the studio to proceed. He said the film would be good and deserved to be made in memory of the author John O'Brien at the very least, and also that Cage had been prepping for months, basically staying in character by drinking non-stop, so it'd be a shame to waste all that effort. The studio agreed, but there was a catch. The budget was going to be just $3.5 million. Thanks to that generosity, some scenes had to be shot without proper permits. In practice, that meant Nicholas and Elizabeth Shue were filmed on the street in a single take. As soon as the scene was done, the whole crew would jump into cars and take off before any trouble showed up. These days, the laws are stricter, and acrobatics like that wouldn't work, but back in 1995, you could get away with it. Leaving Las Vegas made $32 million, costing $3.5, which is definitely a success. The only downside was that thanks to some magic tricks, Cage and the director saw zero cash bonuses. Like, the studio claimed they technically earned just some pocket money from this movie. Nobody really complained, though. Leaving Las Vegas got showered with nominations and awards, and Cage walked away with his first, and so far only, Oscar and Golden Globe for Best Actor. And next you'd think Nicholas had ride the wave of critical acclaim into a string of prestige projects. But nope, Oscar in hand, Nicolas Cage, for reasons known only to Nicolas Cage, decided it was time to become an action star. The odds of Nicholas ending up in The Rock were basically at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Sure, the actor had tried doing action movies before, but nobody showed up for them. People saw Cage as that weird indie guy who'd eat live cockroaches for a role, or sleep wrapped in bandages just to get into character. But once he had that Oscar in hand, producers suddenly thought that audiences would show up for Nicholas no matter what genre he was in. The studio wasn't buying it, however, and refused, insisting that Cage is as good an action hero as a bullet made of crap. So someone else is needed. And then Sean Connery stepped into The Rock after Arnold Schwarzenegger turned this role down. Connery agreed only because he heard Cage might be there too. He'd remembered the actor from Moonstruck and genuinely wanted to work with such a talent. So when Connery heard the studio was thinking about replacing Nicholas, he told them not to. The studio suddenly realized that, hey, maybe Cage wasn't such a bad action star after all. Later during filming, the studio also wanted to boot Michael Bay. And once again, Connery stepped in and told them not to. So the studio suddenly decided that maybe Bay wasn't such a bad director either. The script for The Rock went through multiple writers, including Quentin Tarantino. Cage wasn't exactly blown away by the work of the well-known master of dialogue. The actor thought his character swore way too much, so he suggested replacing the curses with creative euphemisms. The audience appreciated this soy gluten-free twist before that was even trending. The Rock made $336 million on a budget of $75 and became one of the biggest hits of the year. But Nicolas didn't stop there. He followed up with two back-to-back hits that pretty much made him one of the biggest action stars of the 90s. Yep, we're talking Face Off and Con Air. And once again, Schwarzenegger was lurking somewhere in the background. At one point, the legendary duo of Arnie and Stallone were set to star in Face Off. There was even a version with Michael Douglas and Harrison Ford in the studio's mind. Cage himself nearly passed on the role of Castor Troy. He wasn't into playing a villain. Then someone explained that technically, yes, a bad guy, but not really. Plus, he'd get to parody John Travolta the whole time, and that sealed the deal. Naturally, both actors went absolutely wild on set, constantly mimicking each other and overacting, which, let's be honest, only made Face Off even better. In order to polish a movie more, Nicolas pitched a few changes to the script, and director John Woo agreed. He scrapped several scenes based on the actors' feedback. The result was $245 million with a budget of $80. Con Air pulled similar numbers and gave us Nicolas Cage with one of the most glorious haircuts in his career. Face Off and Con Air hit theaters just 3 weeks apart, and together they raked in nearly $500 million. The following year, Cage added another box office hit to his resume, the romantic drama City of Angels. This role was originally meant for Johnny Depp, who by that time had already moved out of Nicolas's apartment. But Cage was still seen as the more talented one, so he was chosen to portray an angel. It wasn't easy for Nicolas. According to the director's vision, angels weren't supposed to blink on camera. Cage later admitted it was insanely hard, but after some intense practice, he somehow managed to unlock a bizarre superpower of staring for minutes without blinking. Some sharp-eyed viewers noticed City of Angels was far from a typical testosterone-fueled action flick. It was actually full-on tearjerker territory. But that was the thing with Cage. He didn't limit himself to one genre and tried everything. He even wanted to play Superman back when comic book movies were considered a hobby for weirdos. Or Tim Burton. The director envisioned Son of Krypton battling giant spiders in a gothic setting. And of course, Nicolas Cage was the one destined to play the lead in that fever dream. Filming almost began, but after Batman and Robin bombed, the studio hit the brakes. They didn't just cancel Superman, they put a freeze on everything comic book related. Instead of diving into superhero movies, Cage went all in on thrillers, starting with Snake Eyes by Brian De Palma. The setup looked promising. At the time, De Palma was riding high after Carlito's Way and Mission Impossible, and brought back his trusted crew from previous hits. The studio didn't hold back on the budget. Cage pocketed a career-high $16 million for the role. Will Smith asked for another $12 million, but the studio suggested maybe it was time to cut the appetites a bit and go with someone more affordable. So Gary Sinise was cast instead. Watching the first 13 minutes, you'd think this crazy, stylish movie definitely crushed it at the box office. But Snake Eyes turned out to be the perfect example of that meme. Around the halfway mark, everything falls apart. One of the reasons might be Steven Spielberg. The maestro was a big fan of De Palma and would constantly invite himself to test screenings of his films. Sometimes, he'd even show up on set and ask to shoot a few scenes himself, which is exactly what happened on Scarface, for example. Usually Spielberg loved De Palma's movies, but with Snake Eyes, something went wrong. The maestro wasn't impressed, so the movie was mercilessly edited. They chopped out 40 minutes, including an entire flood sequence, where Nicolas swims and even drowns a bit. That kind of butchering is bad for any movie, but especially deadly for structured detective thrillers. Once you start slicing and rewriting, the structure is gone and audiences notice it instantly. That's what happened to Snake Eyes. The film made just $104 million on a budget of $73. And just a quick reminder in case you're new here, production budgets don't include marketing costs and cinema cuts, which often add up to just as much as the film itself. The thriller 8mm by Joel Schumacher did better at the box office, but that's about where the good news ends. Critics weren't impressed, and audiences greeted it with polite confusion. Originally, the film was set to star Russell Crowe and go full dark mode, but then Nicolas appeared and Crowe was shown the door. With Cage on board, the budget was doubled and the film was toned down to avoid an R rating that might scare off ticket buyers. The trick worked. How it affected the quality of the movie, the history doesn't say, but we can guess. Cage closed out the 90s with Martin Scorsese's thriller Bringing Out the Dead. Some people call it Taxi Driver 2. And honestly, they have a point here. Maybe that's why the film flopped. Audiences just didn't get why they should watch what felt like a rerun. Or maybe there was another reason, but the fact remains. Bringing Out the Dead had a $55 million budget and only made 17. The awards passed this movie by either, even though critics generally liked it, just not quite enough to hand even a couple of polite nominations. After playing thrillers a bit, Nicolas looked around for his next move, and the choices in front of him were wild. First, he was offered the role of Neo in The Matrix and Aragorn in The Lord of the Rings. He turned down both, saying later he just didn't want to spend years on the other side of the planet away from his family. Then Sam Raimi started circling around Cage, claiming he's the perfect Green Goblin. It seemed like this was finally the actor's chance to jump into the superhero's territory. But Nicolas repeated what he'd already told the creators of Face Off. He wasn't interested in playing villains. Raimi didn't have a face swap twist up his sleeve, so he had to move on to Willem Dafoe. Instead of those 3 projects, Cage chose Gone in 60 Seconds, which he called a tribute to the B-movie classics of the 70s, and since he grew up on that kind of stuff, he just couldn't say no. The movie made $237 million, costing $90, so it technically did well. But when you stack it up against The Matrix or The Lord of the Rings, it's basically lunch money. Some say the numbers could have been higher if not for constant catfights between the director and the screenwriter, which led to endless rewrites and reshoots. If Cage the Street Racer and Cage the Family Man managed to bring in some box office, Cage the Italian and Captain Corelli's Mandolin tanked with no chance. Things went even worse with the actor's second team-up with director John Woo in Windtalkers, a war movie that made just $77 million on a bloated budget of $115. Adaptation and Ridley Scott's Matchstick Men both flopped too. The latter received good critics and audience reviews, but mostly was overshadowed by Cage's performance in Adaptation. Written by Charlie Kaufman, the film picked up a solid stack of awards, including personal nominations for Nicolas for an Oscar, a Golden Globe, and a BAFTA. The actor himself later called it one of the most challenging roles in his career. Well, it clearly became one of the Nicolas's best indeed. Like, where else would we get to see him play a pair of twin brothers with those gorgeous afros? Around this time, Nicolas once again decided to test his Coppola DNA as a talented director. You need just one fact to sum this film up. After seeing it, the infamous Tommy Wiseau gave James Franco the green light to play him in The Disaster Artist.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Despite all the nominations, Cage's box office numbers still weren't looking great. He could have turned things around with Constantine. Yep, the original director of the project, Tarsem Singh, had envisioned Nicolas as John, and the actor was actually ready. But then Singh ran into creative differences with the studio and bailed. Cage followed. Instead of Constantine, Nicolas decided to fix his box office numbers with National Treasure in 2004. The movie was getting dragged like crazy. First, the director said the runtime would be 4 hours. Obviously, after that, he was called an idiot and had to cut an hour and a half. Test audiences hated the result, so another 30 minutes were chopped out. It's widely believed that this explains all the plot holes. National Treasure was basically stripped of half its runtime. Normally, that means the film is doomed at the box office, and both critics and audiences will be spitting at the screen. But then the miracle happened. National Treasure made $348 million, costing $100, and became a crowd favorite. The sequel dropped 3 years later, made even more, and got the green light for a third film, which totally would have happened if not for what came next. And next, one by one, almost all of Nicolas's films started flopping. Despite being liked by both critics and audiences, Andrew Niccol' Lord of War sank, as did The Weatherman. Things looked up a bit after the drama World Trade Center, a project where the director Oliver Stone wanted to see Mel Gibson as a lead at first. Gibson wasn't against it, but the opportunity to direct Apocalypto was more important to him. So, he left the project, and Cage appeared. The movie managed to make back its budget and even earned the studio some pocket change for snacks, which slightly improved Nicolas's standing at the box office, but not for long. Right after that came The Wicker Man. This film is often seen as the turning point in Cage's career, the moment when, for many people, he stopped being just an actor and became a walking meme.
Oh, no, not the beast! Not the beast! Ah!
The Wicker Man was a remake of the 1973 British horror cult classic starring Christopher Lee. That original film had become a surprise hit and built up a loyal fan base over the years. So it's not shocking that someone eventually tried to cash in on its legacy. What is shocking is just how badly things went with the Nicolas Cage version. And probably not just for audiences. Even Cage himself likely didn't expect this role would earn him the very first Razzie nomination in his career. Later on, the actor said pretty much the same thing about The Wicker Man as he once did about Vampire's Kiss. People just didn't get it. According to him, the film was meant to be a dark comedy and an intentional piece of trash. And if you watch it with that mindset, it's actually a lot of fun. But back then, neither critics nor viewers got the joke. And from that point, people started looking at Cage's projects with a fair bit of suspicion. The actor's next film, Ghost Rider, got hit by that suspicion. Despite a hefty budget of $110 million, the film only brought in $229 million, just barely breaking even. That flop must have punched Nicolas pretty hard. He finally made it into the superhero world, and there were even moments in the movie where he actually looked pretty badass. But once again, no one really got it, and Cage received yet another Razzie nomination. DVD sales later helped patch things up a bit, and Ghost Rider even got a sequel 5 years later. With half the budget, it made some money as well, but not enough to justify a third ride. Then came Next and Bangkok Dangerous, both box office flops. And honestly, had Cage passed on these projects, his career might have taken a different turn. But more on that later. Those fails were softened by the solid performance of National Treasure 2 and Knowing. Bad Lieutenant flopped, but received great reviews. Kick-Ass also did well, later becoming something kind of a cult hit. And Cage himself was damn good in it. There was just one problem. The actor didn't get much screen time. So this success didn't help Nicolas's career much, and he planned to bounce back with The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Unfortunately, the actor bounced somewhere in the wrong direction. The Sorcerer's Apprentice was Cage's own project. He pitched the idea to his old buddy Jerry Bruckheimer. They worked together on The Rock, Con Air, Gone in 60 Seconds, and National Treasure. All these collaborations were box office hits, and at the time, Bruckheimer was Hollywood's most profitable producer thanks to Captain Jack Sparrow. Such a respectable man delivered funding for Cage's idea fast, and not just any budget, but $150 million. They were clearly aiming for a full-blown blockbuster with sequels, threequels, and spin-offs in mind. Now we know this greatness never happened. The movie made $215 million. That wasn't enough to cover such a colossus, and The Sorcerer's Apprentice became one of the biggest box office flops of 2010. Later, Cage claimed the movie was heavily cut in post-production after weak test screenings, and that what hit theaters was something else entirely. There's no way to confirm that. Since the movie sank, no director's cut was ever released. So we just have to take his word for it. The Wicker Man was a red flag, meme-worthy and kind of funny though. With The Sorcerer's Apprentice, things got real ugly. A couple of hits, either critically or financially, probably could have saved the day. But then Nicolas kicked off what can only be described as a full-blown tour of flops, with each new movie somehow managing to be worse than the last. Season of the Witch underperformed, then Drive Angry, Seeking Justice, and Joel Schumacher's final film, Trespass, all tanked. Cage topped off this parade of disasters by trying to go full Liam Neeson and rescue his daughter in Stolen. For a couple of years, the actor collected Razzie nominations, audiences rolled their eyes, and the reputation he'd built over decades went lower and lower. This is where you start asking the obvious. What happened? All straight-to-DVD action flicks and almost nothing even remotely watchable, or at least experimental. Where did our good old mad scientist Cage go? And the answer is boring as hell. In the early 2010s, Cage ran into financial problems and had to earn money ASAP. Back when the paychecks were fat, Cage wasn't into keeping money in the bank. He preferred investing in real estate, or in something freaky like the legendary Action Comics with the first appearance of Superman. By the way, that comic shot up in value over the years, but Cage didn't see a dime.
And it's gone.
He bought it for $150,000, and a bit later, the comic was stolen from him. It was found in some dusty corner years later and was resold at auction for a few $1,000,000. Cage still had plenty of real estate, though. The only problem was its value didn't go up. So when Nicolas suddenly needed money to maintain all his German castles, he had no choice but to start selling off his real estate, often at just a third or a quarter of the original price. So the talented actor started signing onto suspicious projects just to deal with the debt. Without this race for cash, Nicolas might have actually sidestepped the whole streak of flops. In theory. In the late 2000s, Darren Aronofsky offered him the lead role in The Wrestler. The director wrote this story specifically with Cage in mind, and the actor was actually ready to participate. But then Bangkok Dangerous came along, offering him $10 million, while The Wrestler only offered $1 million. That very second, Nicolas abandoned ship, and Aronofsky gave the role to Mickey Rourke, who walked away with a Golden Globe, an Oscar nomination, and a career revival. And Cage ended up with Razzie nominations and years of starring in B-action movies. And there he stayed for a long, long time. Quantity over quality. In just 2 years, the actor appeared in 12 films. Most of them were nasty action flicks, which barely made 2 packs of chips at the box office. A lot didn't even bother with theaters and went straight to home media. There were a few exceptions on that sad list, like the cult favorite Mandy, which had some viewers feeling either a spiritual awakening or a bad acid trip. But honestly, it feels like the only film in that entire decade where Cage finally allowed himself to cage again, in all his glorious, unhinged madness. Starting in the 2000s and 20s, Cage finally began to lift his head above water. According to him, that's when he managed to pay off his debts, and for the first time in years, could finally choose projects. That probably explains why Nicolas showed up in The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. Nicolas Cage plays Nicolas Cage there. Well, it's a very meta-modern film, like almost any Cage film these days. Critics and audiences loved it. Same with Pig and Color Out of Space. In 2023, he appeared in Renfield and Dream Scenario. For the latter, Nicolas wasn't nominated for another Razzie, but for a Golden Globe. All these movies flopped at the box office, of course, but at least they made it to theaters, and finally pulled the actor out of Razzie territory to Golden Globes again. And last year, Cage finally landed a box office success with Longlegs. It was directed by Oz Perkins, son of that very Perkins who scared the crap out of everyone in Hitchcock's Psycho. The son decided to follow in his father's footsteps and scare people too, just from behind the camera. Spooky it was. Longlegs pulled in $108 million, costing $10 million. Interestingly, both here and in Renfield, Nicolas plays the villain, the very type of role he spent years avoiding. Soon, The Surfer will be released, a project that first premiered at Cannes last year. The early reviews were pretty nice, so it won't be long before we mere mortals get to see what kind of cinematic gem Nicolas chose this time. Cage also has plenty in the works, including a sequel to Lord of War, a Marvel series where he voices the noir version of Spider-Man, a new streaming show, and a whole basket of movies. In other words, he's back in demand. Critics love him again, and audiences are eager to see whatever wild thing he does next. It's a rare situation, when an actor's so talented that people are willing to forgive his past misfires without needing a wrestler, a whale, or some other Aronofsky teary redemption arc. Just some tolerable movie, not necessarily award-winning, but with Cage being himself again. Experimental, weird, eccentric, a bit diabolic, and totally one of a kind. At this point, Cage isn't just an actor, he's his own genre. Speaking of actors who became their own genre, there's Bruce Willis. Back in the 90s, it didn't matter what the movie was. If Bruce showed up, so did you. That was the rule. We've got a whole video about Bruce. Go check it out. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, drop a comment, and we'll see you next time.